I'm just going to quickly scroll through this article from The Guardian about desire paths. Now, these are something that I call desire lines, but you can call them paths or lines, who cares? And as they say here in the headline, they're the illicit trails that defy the urban planners. And you can see here a very clear example of one that's cutting across the grass there. And if you have a look around our suburbs, you'll find these things here and there, and I'll put up some examples in a minute. And the interesting thing about them is if you read this article, they talk about the tension between the planners who wanted to describe or define where you want to go, and humans who want, where they want to go. So, you've got these kind of, what would you call them? Control freaks on one side who are the planners, who lay out where people should be going. And then you've got everyone else that says, well, stuff that. That's a stupid place to go. I'm going to cut across here. Either that, or it comes down to planners just using, straight lines to define intersections. So, for instance, a T-junction, it's defined as a T, and they don't put any, bends or curves in at the sides, which is where people are naturally going to walk. And, there's some interesting stuff in here about how, they call them free will ways. It's where people, actually want to go. And there's, the path of least resistance is another way of putting it. And it's really interesting thing in here about when we come down a bit further about how a university didn't actually, when they built a new campus, they didn't actually lay down any paths to begin with. What they did is they essentially built all the buildings and then waited a while, and they had a look at where people actually walked. And then, took a drone image or whatever from over the top. They could see where people were going, and that's where they laid the paths down. And that's great, because that's where people actually wanted to go. And if you look around our current environment, and you see these desire lines which have been cut into the grass, and you think, well, they're not going away, and those things have been there forever. So why are our councils not doing anything about it? Is it because they're just completely oblivious to their existence? Because councillors and managers don't live in the area, and they're not walking around or riding around and seeing these things. They're driving everywhere in their cars, and you don't notice these things from a car. You only notice them when you're on a bicycle or when you're on foot. And who knows if council management these days, like the chief executive and the general manager, actually live in the area that they work in, because they tend to move from council to council. So they could be commuting in from elsewhere, and essentially the only places they're seeing within our council area are the council buildings. Probably, the council chambers, and they might go to visit, depots from time to time or something. They essentially get in their car, they drive from home to the council chambers, they work there all day, they jump in their car and they go back. They're not out walking the dogs, they're not walking their kids to school, they're not walking to the shops. They just don't see this stuff. And so they're just, unless they're told it exists, they don't know it exists. Similarly, have we contracted out so many functions these days that we no longer have council staff that are wandering around seeing this stuff? Who would lay a concrete path or a brick path or an asphalt path across there within a council these days? Do those people actually still exist? Or has all that stuff been contracted out to private concreting firms? Now that makes sense when you're building lots of footpaths and driveways and stuff like that. But for a lot of simple little jobs, which might only be a couple of feet long, do you need to do that? And the answer, of course, is no. It's ridiculous to try and contract that stuff out. You just want to send a couple of people down there with a truck and some bags of cement and a wheelbarrow and a shovel, and just say, look, lay a bit of concrete there, or here's half a pallet of bricks. Go and spend a couple of days laying bricks and fill in the corner there. So you've filled in the desire line, or let's turn that into a little garden space. Here's some bricks to make a surround and put some plants in the middle so people won't walk through them anymore. Have we reached the point of absolute insane bureaucracy and contracting out, where councils no longer have the resources to do that internally, so these things just don't ever get fixed? Because you can imagine the nightmare of having to bring in a contractor to fill in just a little corner section of path. I mean, it would just be absolutely nightmarish. You've got to go and write a scope of work, you probably have to go to tender. You've got to review the tenders. Then you've got to get approval to go ahead and, what do you call it? Hand the tender out. And then you've got to, works orders and goodness knows what else. So maybe it's just easier to just leave them as it is because it's just too much trouble these days in terms of paperwork and bureaucracy to actually do anything about it. Just it's like, oh, forget it. There's a month of work involved in doing the paperwork to get 4 hours of work actually done. So it'd be really interesting to hear from councillors, for instance, why these things just stay like this forever. Is it because councils don't know about them because they're not out wandering around and seeing the stuff for themselves? Is it because staff are unaware they exist, or they see them but they don't recognise them for what they are and they're not reporting them and saying, hey boss, I think what we should do is go out there next week and lay a bit of bit of concrete there to fill that thing in? Or is it the absolute bureaucratic nightmare that just makes it all too hard to get this stuff done?